beach at dawn. 7 disciples in a boat, just offshore, hauling in an empty net. They have been out all night and caught nothing, which, for men who grew up on this lake, who have spent their entire lives reading the water, is not just a practical failure, but a particular kind of humiliation. These are not beginners. This is their lake. These are their nets, and the night has given them nothing. And then a figure on the shore calls out across the water, "Friends, have you caught any fish?" "No." "Throw your net on the right side of the boat." They throw. The net fills so fast they cannot haul it in. 153 fish. John counts them with the precision of a man who was there and wanted you to know he was there. And the beloved disciple turns to Peter and says, "It is the Lord." And Peter, because he is Peter, wraps his outer garment around him and jumps into the water. The others follow in the boat. And when they get to shore, when they pull themselves up onto the beach, wet and exhausted and blinking in the early light, here is what they find: a charcoal fire, fish on it, bread beside it, already cooking, already warm. The risen Lord of the universe has been on this beach since before they arrived, and he has not been waiting idly. He has been making breakfast. "Come and have breakfast," he says. This is the meal I want to take you to by the end of this video, because it is not just a tender postscript to the resurrection story. It is one of the most carefully constructed scenes in all 4 Gospels, staged with a precision that requires a single Greek word to unlock. A word John uses only twice in his entire Gospel, both times in connection with the same man standing beside the same kind of fire. We will get to that word. We will get to that man. We will get to what the fire means and why John chose it, and what Jesus does after the breakfast is finished that could only have happened because the breakfast happened first. But before we get to the beach, we need to go back through the meals that prepared for it, the meals that established the pattern, that taught us what God does at tables, that showed us over and over again that something happens when God shows up with food that cannot be predicted from the ingredients. Because this is not a story about food. This is not a story about hospitality as a spiritual virtue. This is not a story about the importance of eating together as a spiritual discipline. This is a story about what God has always used the table for. The thing that keeps happening at meals in Scripture that has nothing to do with the nutrition and everything to do with who is sitting at it and what they needed and how God knew before they asked. The table is one of God's primary languages. And once you learn to read it, once you start seeing what he keeps saying there, you will not sit down to eat the same way again. The night is the 14th of Nisan, Egypt, somewhere in the region of Goshen, where the Israelite community has lived for 400 years, long enough that Egypt is the only home most of them have ever known, long enough that the slavery has become the texture of ordinary life, long enough that the idea of leaving has probably stopped feeling like a real possibility and started feeling like a dream people tell their children to keep hope alive. And tonight, everything changes. But here's what I want you to notice about how it changes. Because the Exodus does not happen the way you might expect a divine rescue to happen. There is no army. There is no battle. There is no dramatic confrontation in the streets of Egypt between the power of God and the power of Pharaoh. What there is, what God instructs Moses to tell every Israelite household to do on this night, is to prepare a meal, a lamb, roasted over fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. The Hebrew word for the bitter herbs is maror, deliberately, specifically, purposefully bitter. Not a seasoning to add flavor, but a taste to force memory. The bitterness of 400 years of slavery, the bitterness of the mortar and the brick and the labor without end, placed on the tongue on purpose, so that the body remembers what the mind might be tempted to soften. You are going to eat the bitterness before you leave it. And here is the detail that stops me every time. God does not tell them to prepare this meal and then wait for the deliverance to come and then eat in celebration. He tells them to eat it in haste, sandals on, staff in hand, cloak tucked into their belt, while the deliverance is happening. The blood on the doorpost is going up while the lamb is going on the fire. The angel of death is moving through Egypt while they are sitting at the table chewing. The meal is not the celebration after the rescue. The meal is the rescue. They are eating their way out of Egypt. And here is what Josephus understood about the Passover that most of us miss when we read it as ancient history. He writes that when Jewish families celebrated the Passover in his own day, in the first century, 1,000 years after the original event, they did not think of themselves as commemorating something their ancestors did. They thought of themselves as doing it, as being present at the original table, as the people who were delivered, eating the meal of the delivered, with their sandals on and their staff in hand, ready to leave the place that had enslaved them. Every Passover table is the original table, which means the meal that Jesus eats with his disciples in the upper room, the meal we call the Last Supper, is not just a farewell dinner. It is a Passover meal. Jesus is the host of a table that every Jewish person at that table has been sitting at their whole lives, and he is about to reframe every element of it. The lamb, the bread, the bitter herbs, the cup, all of it pointing somewhere new, all of it about to receive a meaning that will make the original meaning deeper, not obsolete. But we are not there yet. Before the upper room, before the hillside, before any of the meals that the Gospels record, there is a meal in a desert, prepared by hands that are not human, left beside a man who is asleep and does not know it is there. His name is Elijah, the prophet who called fire from heaven on Carmel, who then ran for his life when Jezebel threatened him, who walked a full day into the wilderness and sat down under a broom tree and asked God to let him die. And then he fell asleep. And while he slept, an angel came, not with a vision, not with a theological argument for why Elijah's despair was misplaced, not with a detailed plan for the next chapter of his prophetic ministry, with bread, baked over hot coals, and a jar of water beside it. The angel touches him, and this touch, this specific physical contact, is the first thing that happens before a word is spoken, before the food is explained, or the situation addressed, or the future outlined. A touch. And then, get up and eat. Now I want you to think about something. Think about the lowest point you have been at in your own life. Not the most dramatic, the lowest. The place where the exhaustion was so complete that you stopped being able to imagine a future, where you had given everything you had and arrived at the bottom of yourself, and there was nothing left. And think about whether anyone brought you food. Not a speech, not advice, not a carefully worded message about how things were going to get better. Food, left on your doorstep or placed in front of you without ceremony, or slid across the table in your direction by someone who noticed you had not eaten and decided to do something about it. If that has happened to you, if you have ever received that specific, ordinary, irreducible kindness, you know something about what happens to Elijah under the broom tree. Because the bread baked over hot coals is not just calories. It is not just fuel for the journey ahead. It is God noticing. It is the God of the universe looking at a man who asked to die and deciding that what he needs first, before the commission, before the vision, before the still small voice at Horeb, is food and sleep. The journey is too much for you. 5 words. The most pastoral sentence in the Old Testament. Not, you are being dramatic. Not, remember all the things I have done for you. Not, pull yourself together. There is work to do. The journey is too much for you, and here is your bread. The angel comes a second time, touches him again. Get up and eat. The journey is too much for you. 2 touches, 2 meals, no explanation. And then Elijah gets up and travels 40 days on the strength of that food. 40 days. The same number Moses spent on the mountain. The same number Jesus spends in the wilderness before his ministry begins. The bread was not ordinary bread. It carried him further than bread should be able to carry a person, which is what tends to happen when God is the one who baked it. And here is what I want you to hold from these 2 meals: the Passover in Egypt and the bread under the broom tree, before we move on. Both of them arrive before the explanation. The Israelites eat the Passover meal while the deliverance is still in progress, while the angel of death is still moving through the streets, while the morning that will change everything has not yet come. Elijah receives bread before he knows where he is going, or what the next chapter holds, or why the suffering was necessary. The food comes first. The table is where God arrives before the explanation does. And that pattern, the meal before the meaning is clear, the bread before the future is visible, is about to get more specific and more personal and more costly. Before we go any further, I want you to sit with the pattern for just a moment. The Israelites in Egypt do not eat the Passover meal after the deliverance is complete. They eat it while the angel of death is still moving through the streets. The food arrives inside the crisis. The bread and the bitter herbs and the lamb are consumed in the middle of the worst night Egypt has ever seen. Sandals on, staff in hand, ready to leave, eating in haste because the morning that changes everything is still an hour away. And Elijah does not receive the bread after God explains what is coming next. He does not get the vision of Horeb and then the meal as a reward for good theological posture. The bread is there when he wakes up, before a single word about the future, before the recommissioning, before any of it. The food comes before the explanation, every time, which means the table is not where God shows up after things have been sorted out. It is where he shows up in the middle of the unsorted, in the middle of the crisis, in the middle of the exhaustion, in the middle of the night, before the morning that will change everything. The table is where God arrives before the explanation does. And if you have ever had a meal arrive at exactly the right moment, if you have ever sat down to something ordinary and found it was more than ordinary, if you have ever been fed in a way that carried you further than the food should have been able to carry you, then you have been at one of these tables. You just may not have known it yet. If that is landing for you right now, I want you to do 2 things. First, subscribe if you have not yet. We go this deep every week, and I do not want you to miss what is coming in the next few minutes. Second, drop a comment below and tell me, has a meal ever arrived in your life at exactly the right moment? Ordinary food that felt like something more? Tell me below, because we have not gotten to the hillside yet. We have not talked about 5 loaves and 2 fish and the gesture Jesus makes before he distributes the bread. The gesture that will reappear at a table in an upper room and on a road to Emmaus and on a beach at dawn. And we have not gotten to the fire, the charcoal fire, the specific Greek word, the man who needs to be brought back to the moment he has been trying to forget. That is where we are going. Stay with me. It is late in the day. The crowd has been following Jesus since morning, across the lake, into the hills, through the kind of hours that blur together when someone is teaching in a way that makes you forget you are hungry. There are 5,000 men, plus women and children. They are in a remote place. And the disciples come to Jesus with the practical assessment of people who have been doing the logistics of a traveling ministry and know what the numbers mean. Send the crowd away so they can go to the surrounding villages and buy themselves food. It is a reasonable suggestion. It is the obvious solution. It is the response of people who have correctly identified the problem. Too many people, too little food, too far from anywhere that can help, and have arrived at the sensible conclusion. And Jesus says, you give them something to eat. The disciples look at what they have: 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish. For a crowd that, counting everyone, is probably somewhere between 10 and 20,000 people. And here is what Jesus does. He tells the crowd to sit down on the grass. He takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. He looks up to heaven. He gives thanks. The Greek word is eucharistesis, from which we get the word Eucharist, the word the church has used for 2,000 years for the meal Jesus instituted the night before his death. He breaks the bread. He gives it to his disciples to distribute, and the disciples distribute to the crowds. Take, give thanks, break, give. 4 gestures in that sequence, and the crowd eats until they are full, not until the food runs out, and everyone gets a small portion, not until the disciples have rationed carefully and managed to stretch it as far as it will go, until they are full. And then the disciples collect 12 basketfuls of broken pieces left over. 12 baskets, one for each disciple, as if the miracle produced not just enough for the crowd, but excess for the ones who had doubted there was enough to begin with. And the next day, when the crowd finds him on the other side of the lake and asks how he got there, he says something that turns the feeding into a claim. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. The meal became a metaphor. The bread became the declaration. The 5 loaves on a hillside in Galilee became the frame through which Jesus explains what he is and what he offers. Not bread that satisfies for a day, but bread that ends hunger entirely. Pay attention to the gesture. Take, give thanks, break, give, because you are about to see it again. The room is an upper room in Jerusalem. The night is the 14th of Nisan, the same date as the Passover in Egypt, the same meal the Israelites ate with their sandals on and their staff in hand, the same ritual that Jewish families have been enacting every year for over 1,000 years. Jesus is the host. His 12 disciples are at the table. The lamb has been prepared. The bitter herbs are on the table. The cups of wine are poured. And Jesus knows everything that is about to happen. He knows that Judas has already accepted 30 pieces of silver and is waiting for the right moment to lead the authorities to him. He knows that Peter, who is right now probably the most confident person in the room, will before sunrise deny 3 times that he ever knew him. He knows that before the night is over, every single person at this table will have abandoned him. And he takes the bread and gives thanks and breaks it and gives it to them. Every one of them, the betrayer and the denier and the ones who will scatter, he serves them all. He does not withhold the bread from Judas. He does not skip Peter. He takes the bread that he has just reframed as his own body, broken for them, and he puts it in the hands of the people who are about to break him. And then he says something that changes every meal that comes after it. Do this in remembrance of me. The Greek word for remembrance is anamnesis, and it means something more than simply calling a past event to mind. It means making the past present, representing it. The same understanding that Josephus described about the Passover. You are not remembering the table. You are at the table, now applied to this meal. this bread, this cup. Every time you do this, you are here in this room, at this table, with these broken pieces in your hands, which means every meal the church has shared since that night, every time bread has been taken and Thanksgiving and the loaf broken, is inside this meal. The feeding of the 5,000 points forward to it. The Passover in Egypt points forward to it. And the beach breakfast points back to it. The risen Christ distributing bread to his disciples one more time in the early light beside a fire that is about to say something that no sermon could say as precisely. But first, the night gets darker. Judas leaves the table, and Jesus goes to the garden, and everything that was set in motion at the table in the upper room begins to move toward its destination. The meal that changed everything is about to cost everything. And 3 days later, on a beach beside a charcoal fire, Jesus will set a table again for the people who were not able to stay awake, for the people who ran, for the person who stood beside a different fire and said 3 times, I do not know him. Now, I need to tell you about the word, the specific Greek word that John uses for the fire on the beach, the word that unlocks everything about why this meal is staged the way it is, why it happens here and not somewhere else, why Jesus is already cooking when the disciples arrive and has not waited for them to bring the fish before starting the fire. The word is Anthrakia. It means charcoal fire, a fire made from charcoal rather than wood, a specific, particular kind of fire with a specific, particular kind of warmth and smell and sound. John uses this word exactly twice in his entire gospel. The first time is in chapter 18. Jesus has been arrested in the garden. He has been taken to the courtyard of the high priest, and Peter, who followed at a distance, who could not stay away but could not go too close, is standing in that courtyard. And the text says, it was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a charcoal fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. Anthrakia, charcoal fire. And while he stands at that fire, 3 people ask him if he is one of Jesus' disciples. 3 times he says, no, I am not. I am not. I do not know him. And then a rooster crows, and Peter goes outside and weeps bitterly. The charcoal fire in the courtyard of the high priest is the fire beside which Peter dismantled everything he had said he was. The fire beside which the most confident disciple became the man who could not even claim to know the name of his teacher. The fire whose warmth he accepted while the man he denied was being tried inside. Now go to chapter 21. Jesus is on the beach. The disciples are in the boat. The net fills. The beloved disciple says it is the Lord. And Peter, impulsive, reckless, desperate Peter, wraps his outer garment around him and jumps into the water. And when he gets to shore, there is a charcoal fire, Anthrakia. John uses this word twice in his entire gospel. Both times, Peter is standing beside a charcoal fire. The first time, he denies Jesus 3 times. The second time, Jesus has breakfast waiting. This is not a coincidence of vocabulary. This is John telling you exactly what this meal is and exactly what it is for. Jesus did not choose a wood fire or a torch or any other way to cook breakfast on that beach. He chose a charcoal fire. The same warmth, the same smell, the same specific sensory, body-level reminder of the worst night of Peter's life. He is bringing Peter back to the fire, not to punish him there, not to rehearse the failure or extract a confession or make sure Peter understands the full weight of what he did, to redeem it, to take the thing Peter most associates with his own failure and fill it with something else. Warmth that welcomes instead of warmth that witnessed betrayal. bread that says, come and eat, instead of silence that says, you are not who you said you were. Come and have breakfast. And none of the disciples dared ask who he was, because they knew it was the Lord. They eat. John does not give us the conversation during the meal. He gives us the silence of people who know they are in the presence of something they cannot fully hold and are not going to try to fill with words. They eat. The fish, the bread, the food that was there before they arrived, prepared by hands that had been pierced and were whole again, warming over a fire that was chosen on purpose. And when they had finished eating, only then, only after the meal is done and the fish is eaten and the bread is gone, Jesus turns to Peter, Simon, son of John, not Peter, the name Jesus gave him, the rock, the one who was supposed to be the foundation, Simon, the name he was born with, as if Jesus is going all the way back to the beginning, past the calling and the miracles and the declarations and the denials, back to the man before the disciple. Do you love me more than these? 3 times he asks. 3 times Peter answers. 3 times. 1 for each denial. 1 for each no beside the charcoal fire in the courtyard. Jesus restores what was broken. Feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Feed my sheep. The reinstatement is as specific as the failure. The meal made it possible, not because eating together creates sentimental warmth that makes hard conversations easier, but because the meal said something before the words could. The charcoal fire said, I know where you have been. I know what that fire looked like. I am not pretending it did not happen, and I made breakfast anyway. I want to leave you with 3 things. The first is this. Every meal that changes everything in Scripture is eaten inside the crisis, not after it resolves. The Israelites eat the Passover while the angel of death is still moving through the streets. Elijah receives bread before he knows what comes next. The 5,000 are fed before anyone has explained what the miracle means. The disciples at the Last Supper eat with the betrayer at the table and a cross 12 hours away. And Peter eats breakfast beside a charcoal fire before the reinstatement conversation begins. The table arrives before the explanation, every time, which means this, and I want you to hold this carefully. The meal in front of you does not have to wait for your life to be sorted out before it can be significant. The bread does not arrive after the crisis resolves. It arrives in the middle. It arrives when you are still in the boat with an empty net. It arrives when you are under the broom tree. It arrives when the betrayer is still at the table and the worst night of your life is still ahead. The table is where God shows up before the explanation does. That is the first thing. The second is this. The bread that sustained Elijah 40 days looked exactly like bread. The meal that reinstated Peter looked exactly like breakfast. The feeding of 5,000 began with 5 loaves and 2 fish that looked exactly like not enough. And the Passover meal looked exactly like a Last Supper, eaten in haste, in the dark, in a house marked with blood by people who did not yet know what morning was coming. The ordinary is the vessel, which means the meal in front of you, the one that looks like just dinner, just lunch, just the thing you eat because you are hungry and it is time, may be more than it appears. The question is not whether God shows up at tables. The question is whether you are paying attention when he does. The table was never just a table. That is the second thing. And the third, the one I want you to carry longest, is this. He set the table before they got to shore. He was on that beach before the boat arrived. He had the fire going before Peter jumped in the water. He had the fish on and the bread ready before a single disciple set foot on the sand. And when they came ashore, wet and exhausted and carrying 153 fish and the complicated weight of everything that had happened since the last time they shared a meal with him. He did not begin with a sermon or a debrief or a theological processing of the resurrection. He said, "Come and have breakfast." And that is what he is still saying to the people who have been out all night catching nothing, to the people who followed at a distance and ended up standing beside the wrong fire, to the people who are still in the boat, hauling in the net, not yet sure if the figure on the shore is who they think it is. Come and have breakfast. The fire is already lit. The bread is already there. He has been on the beach since before you arrived. Now, before you go, one question. Has a meal ever arrived in your life at exactly the right moment? Ordinary food that felt like something more, that carried you further than it should have, that said something no one found the words for, that arrived before you had the language to ask for it. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if someone you know is in the boat right now, out all night, empty-handed, not sure there is anything left worth casting the net for, share this video with them today, because the figure on the shore is already there, and the fire is already going. And he is saying the same thing he has always said at every table that ever changed everything. Come and have breakfast. The table was never just a table. It never is.